The sterile white of the hospital room blurred as another contraction ripped through me. My hand, slick with sweat, slipped from the bed rail. "Victor," I gasped, my voice a shredded whisper. "Where is the doctor?" He stood by the window, his silhouette stark against the raging storm outside, his back to me. He didn't turn. He simply checked the time on his platinum watch, the soft click echoing louder than my heart monitor. "The doctor isn't coming, Nova," he said, his voice as cold and unforgiving as the city lights below. "Neither am I." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the storm inside and out. Our life was a masterpiece of deception. To the outside world, Victor and Nova Vance were the golden couple of Boston's elite. He was the heir to the Vance shipping empire, a man carved from ambition and old money, with a smile that could disarm senators and a gaze that held the chill of the Atlantic. I was the artist he'd plucked from obscurity, the quiet, observant girl whose canvases were now a footnote to my primary role, the perfect corporate wife. Our Beacon Hill brownstone was less a home and more a museum of our success. Sunlight, carefully filtered through antique stained glass windows, illuminated rooms filled with Victor's curated collection of maritime artifacts, and my few, strategically placed paintings, the ones he deemed palatable for his guests. Our life was governed by an unspoken set of rules, a rigid schedule of charity galas, business dinners, and weekend retreats to our sterile, glass-walled mansion in the Hamptons. I met him at a gallery showing, a lifetime ago it seemed. I was a nervous, paint-splattered 23-year-old, standing beside a canvas that held all my dreams. He'd bought my entire collection that night. Not because he loved the art, I'd later realize, but because he loved the idea of owning the artist. He saw me as another beautiful object to acquire, a testament to his impeccable taste. And I, dazzled by his charm and the sheer force of his presence, had walked willingly into the gilded cage he'd built for me. The first few years were a blur of intoxicating luxury. He showered me with gifts, diamonds that felt like tiny, cold shackles on my skin, couture gowns that felt like costumes. He taught me which fork to use, how to smile vacantly during boardroom discussions I wasn't meant to understand, and how to deflect intrusive questions about my own abandoned career. "We are a team, Nova," he would say, his hand possessively on the small of my back. "Your role is to make us look good. My role is everything else." The cracks in the facade began to show slowly, then all at once. It started with small cruelties. A dismissive wave of his hand when I tried to show him a new sketch. A cutting remark about my provincial background in front of his smirking friends. His control was absolute, a silken thread tightening around my life until I could barely breathe. He monitored my calls, vetted my friends until I had none left, and replaced my vibrant, messy art studio with a sterile home gym I never used. Then came the pregnancy. It wasn't planned. For me, it was a terrifying, secret joy, a tiny life that was mine and mine alone. For Victor, it was an inconvenience, then an opportunity, an heir. The Vance dynasty would continue. His initial anger quickly morphed into a new form of control. He dictated my diet, my exercise, my very thoughts. He hired a team of specialists who reported directly to him. My body was no longer my own. It was a vessel for his legacy. "It will be a boy," he declared one evening, swirling a glass of scotch as he stared into the fireplace. "We'll name him Alistair. Alistair Vance. It has the right sound, don't you think?" I remember placing a hand on my burgeoning stomach, a silent rebellion taking root in my heart. I didn't want an Alistair Vance. I wanted a Leo or a Sam. I wanted a child who would know the joy of finger painting and muddy knees, not the cold weight of a dynastic name. But I said nothing. I had long since learned that my voice was a currency I could no longer afford to spend. The last few months were the worst. His business was facing a hostile takeover from a rising competitor, a man named Julian Thorne. The name was a curse in our house, spoken in hushed, angry tones. Victor became more volatile, his moods swinging from icy indifference to explosive rage. The pressure was suffocating, and I was his primary outlet. He saw my pregnancy not as a miracle, but as a weakness, a distraction he couldn't afford. The night the storm broke, both outside and inside our carefully constructed world, I was 9 months pregnant and utterly alone. Victor was supposed to be at a critical merger meeting, one he claimed would save the company. He'd been gone for 2 days, his phone going straight to voicemail. I was used to his absences, but this felt different. A deep, primal fear had settled in my bones. The first contraction hit me like a bolt of lightning as I was standing in the nursery, my hand on the smooth, unpainted wood of the crib. It was sharp, shocking. I crumpled to the floor, gasping. Another followed, then another. This was it. It was too soon, but it was happening. I crawled to my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. Voicemail. I tried his assistant. No answer. I called the car service he insisted I use. A polite, automated voice informed me that all services had been suspended due to the worsening weather. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he answered. The connection was terrible, the sound of wind and rain howling in the background. "What is it, Nova?" he snapped, his voice impatient. "I'm busy." "The baby," I cried, the words torn from me by another wave of pain. "It's coming. Now, Victor, I'm alone." There was a pause. I heard a woman's laugh in the background, low and throaty. It was a sound I knew. Isabel, his personal legal counsel, a woman with eyes as sharp and predatory as a hawk's. The sound of her laugh cut deeper than any of his insults. "Get yourself to the hospital," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "The account is paid. They know you're coming." "I can't," I sobbed. "The storm. No cars." "Then figure it out," he said, and the line went dead. The finality of that click, the absolute absence of care or concern, was more painful than any contraction. In that moment, the gilded cage shattered, and I saw the monster I had married for who he truly was. I was not his wife. I was a liability. And he had just cut me loose. The pain was a living entity, a relentless tide pulling me under. I lay on the cold marble of the foyer, the dead phone clutched in my hand, my world reduced to the agonizing rhythm of my own body. The grand staircase loomed before me, each step an impossible mountain. The hospital was a world away. Victor's words echoed in the cavernous silence of the house. Figure it out. He had planned this. The suspended car service, the unanswered calls, the convenient meeting during the worst storm of the decade. It was a perfectly executed act of abandonment, as calculated as any of his business deals. He wasn't just leaving me, he was leaving me to die. He was erasing an inconvenience. A primal surge of adrenaline, fueled by a mother's desperate will to protect her unborn child, forced me to move. I dragged myself across the floor, my couture dress tearing against the marble. Outside, the wind howled like a grieving animal, rattling the century-old windows. Rain lashed against the glass, turning the world into a churning, watery abyss. My only hope was the service entrance, the small, rarely used door in the back of the house that led to a narrow cobblestone alley. If I could just get outside, maybe someone would see me. Maybe someone would help. It took me an eternity to reach it, crawling past the silent, judging portraits of Victor's ancestors. Each contraction left me breathless, my vision tunneling to a pinpoint of black. I finally fumbled with the bolt, the cold metal biting into my skin. The door flew open, torn from my grasp by a violent gust of wind that sucked the air from my lungs. The alley was a river of churning black water. Rain, driven sideways by the wind, stung my face like needles. The world was a symphony of chaos. I took one step out into the storm and my legs gave way. I collapsed onto the slick cobblestones, the icy water soaking through my clothes. Another scream swallowed by the tempest. This is it, I thought, a strange sense of calm washing over me. This is where I die. I closed my eyes, picturing my baby's face, a face I would never see. I'm so sorry, I whispered to the tiny life inside me. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. And then, through the roar of the storm, I heard a sound. A car engine, sputtering, but getting closer. Headlights cut through the deluge, blinding me. A dark sedan, impossibly out of place in this weather, skidded to a halt just feet from where I lay. The driver's side door opened and a figure emerged, a tall man silhouetted against the headlights. He was a shadow in the storm, moving with a calm, deliberate purpose that seemed to defy the chaos around him. He knelt beside me, his presence a sudden, shocking anchor in my swirling vortex of pain. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" His voice was deep and steady, a lifeline in the darkness. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the glint of rain on his dark hair and the intense focus in his eyes. I tried to speak, but only a choked sob escaped. "You're in labor," he stated, his gaze taking in my swollen belly, my torn dress. It wasn't a question. He shrugged off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around me, the warmth of it a shocking comfort against my frozen skin. "We need to get you out of here. Now." Without another word, he scooped me into his arms. He was incredibly strong, lifting me as if I weighed nothing. The scent of rain, wool, and something else, something clean and safe, filled my senses. I buried my face in his shoulder, clinging to him as another contraction seized me. He didn't flinch. He just held me tighter, murmuring, "Breathe. Just breathe. I've got you." He settled me gently into the passenger seat of his car, the leather cool against my skin. The interior was dark, clean, and quiet, a sanctuary from the raging storm. He shut the door, and the roar of the wind and rain was instantly muffled, reduced to a distant hum. He got back in the driver's seat, his movements efficient and calm. He cranked the heat, and blessed warmth began to seep into my frozen limbs. "Where's your husband?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral as he navigated the flooded alley. The question was a shard of glass in my heart. "He's not coming," I whispered, the words tasting like poison. The man glanced at me, and in the dim light of the dashboard I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Pity? Anger? I couldn't tell. He didn't press. He just focused on driving. "There's a small private clinic not far from here," he said. "It's run by a friend of mine. It's not a fancy hospital, but it's safe, and the doctor is the best in the city. We'll be there in 10 minutes. I nodded, unable to speak, my body consumed by the next wave of pain. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white. The man reached over and placed his hand over mine. His hand was large and warm, his touch surprisingly gentle. "My name is Julian," he said softly. "What's yours?" "Nova," I managed to get out. A strange look crossed his face, a flicker of recognition that I was in too much pain to process. "Nova?" he repeated, his voice low. "Okay, Nova, you're going to be okay. Just hold on." The name didn't register. In that moment, he wasn't Julian Thorne, Victor's hated rival. He was just Julian, a stranger in the storm. My savior. The man who had found me when my own husband had left me for dead. And as he drove through the flooded streets of Boston, I held onto his hand as if it were the only thing keeping me and my baby alive. The 5 years that followed were a blur of healing and transformation. Julian Thorne didn't just save me from the storm. He gave me a new life, a world away from the gilded cage I had once called home. He took me and my newborn son, whom I named Leo, to a quiet, secluded estate in Northern California, a place of rolling hills and ancient redwood trees that seemed to whisper secrets of resilience and strength. The clinic Julian had taken me to was clean, discreet, and staffed by people who asked no questions. Dr. Eris Thorne, Julian's older brother, was a kind, weary-eyed man who delivered my son and stitched up the ragged edges of my life with quiet competence. He treated the deep, soul-crushing exhaustion and the postpartum depression that followed with a gentle patience I had never known. For the first year, I was a ghost. I moved through the beautiful, sun-drenched rooms of Julian's estate like a phantom. My world shrunk to the four walls of the nursery. Leo was my only anchor, his tiny, grasping fingers, his milky scent, the fierce, unconditional love in his eyes, the only things that felt real. He was the reason I got out of bed each morning, the reason I forced myself to eat, to breathe, to exist. Julian was a constant, unobtrusive presence. He gave me space, but he never let me be truly alone. He would leave books on my bedside table, knowing I couldn't sleep. He had the kitchen stocked with my favorite foods, though he never saw me eat. He would take Leo for long walks in his stroller through the sprawling gardens, his deep voice a gentle rumble as he told the baby about the stock market or the migratory patterns of birds. He never spoke of Victor. He never asked about that night. He simply created a sanctuary where I could slowly, painfully, begin to piece myself back together. The turning point came on Leo's first birthday. I found Julian in his study, a vast room lined with books from floor to ceiling. He was on a conference call, his voice sharp and decisive, the ruthless businessman I knew he was. But the moment he saw me hesitate in the doorway, his entire demeanor softened. He ended the call abruptly. "Nova," he said, his voice gentle, "is everything all right?" I was holding a small, clumsily wrapped gift for Leo. My hands were shaking. I wanted to thank you," I whispered, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "For everything. For saving us." He stood and walked over to me, his gaze serious. "You have nothing to thank me for. What Vance did, it was monstrous. I only did what any decent human being would have done." "But why?" I finally asked, the question that had haunted my waking moments. "Why were you there? In that alley?" He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I was on my way to see him. I had acquired a controlling interest in his company. The deal was done. I went to his house to tell him in person. It seems I arrived just after he left." He looked away, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "I saw the back door fly open. I saw you fall. The rest, you know." The revelation stunned me. The man who had destroyed my husband's empire was the same man who had saved his wife and child. The irony was so thick I could taste it. "What happened to him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He lost everything," Julian said, his voice flat. "He was ruined. He disappeared. Rumor is he went overseas to try and rebuild." That night, for the first time in a year, I picked up a paintbrush. My hands were stiff, my mind a fog of grief and rage. But I painted. I painted the storm, the fear, the betrayal. I poured all my pain and anger onto the canvas until I was left, weeping and exhausted in the early hours of the morning. Julian found me there, asleep on the floor, surrounded by my mess. He didn't wake me. He simply covered me with a blanket and, when I woke, there was a fresh set of professional-grade paints and a dozen new canvases waiting for me. That was the beginning of my rebirth. With Julian's quiet encouragement, I rediscovered the artist I had buried. My style had changed. It was darker, more complex, imbued with a raw, emotional honesty that was both terrifying and liberating. I painted under a pseudonym, and to my astonishment, the art world took notice. Julian's contacts helped, but the work stood on its own. Within 2 years, I was a rising star, an enigmatic artist known only as Phoenix, whose canvases commanded staggering prices at galleries in New York, London, and Tokyo. I also began to learn about the world I was now a part of. Julian, seeing the sharp, analytical mind that Victor had tried so hard to suppress, began to teach me about his business. He talked to me about finance, about strategy, about power. He treated me not as a fragile victim, but as an equal, an intelligent woman whose insights he valued. I devoured books on economics and corporate law. I sat in on his meetings, a silent observer at first, then an active participant. I discovered I had a knack for it, a ruthless, strategic mind that Victor had never bothered to look for. The frail, timid woman who had crawled out into the storm was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, harder, more self-assured. I was no longer Nova Vance, the trophy wife. I was Nova, the Phoenix, a successful artist and a shrewd businesswoman, and I was the mother of a bright, beautiful 4-year-old boy who was my entire world. Leo grew up in a world of sunshine and love, with no knowledge of the monster who was his father. He called Julian Uncle Jules, and the bond between them was a beautiful thing to watch. Julian taught him how to skip stones, how to identify constellations, how to treat everyone with kindness and respect. He was the father Victor could never have been. My relationship with Julian evolved slowly, naturally. It was a bond forged in trauma and rebuilt in trust and mutual respect. There was a quiet intimacy between us, a deep, unspoken understanding. He was the only person who had seen me at my absolute worst, and he had not turned away. One evening, as we sat on the veranda watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, he turned to me, his expression serious. "I have to go back to Boston," he said. "There's a situation that requires my personal attention." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "It involves Victor Vance. He's back, and he's trying to rebuild his empire, starting with what's left of his father's company." The name was a punch to the gut. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a ghost of the fear I thought I had conquered. I looked over at Leo, who was chasing fireflies on the lawn, his laughter echoing in the twilight. The thought of that man, that monster, ever coming near my son filled me with a ferocious, protective rage. "I'm coming with you," I said, my voice low and steady. The decision was instantaneous, born of 5 years of carefully nurtured strength. Julian looked at me, a question in his eyes. "He took my life from me once," I said, my voice hardening. "He tried to take my son. I won't let him rise again. I won't let him hurt anyone else. It's time he faced the woman he created." A slow smile spread across Julian's face. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "In fact, I have a proposition for you. A way to get you into the rooms he's in, to get you close enough to see the whites of his eyes. A way for us to protect everything we've built." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Marry me, Nova. Not for love, not for show, for war. Become Nova Thorne, the bride of his greatest enemy, and let's go back to Boston and burn his world to the ground." Victor Vance returned to Boston not with a bang, but with a whisper. He slipped back into the city like a phantom, a ghost of the man who had once commanded its financial heights. The 5 years in self-imposed exile, a desperate scramble through the less-than-savory financial markets of Dubai and Hong Kong, had changed him. The boyish charm that had once been his greatest asset had hardened into a brittle, cynical shell. There were new lines around his eyes, etched by sleepless nights and bitter resentment. The platinum watch was gone, replaced by a simple steel timepiece. He was leaner, hungrier, and infinitely more dangerous. He didn't return to the grand brownstone on Beacon Hill. Julian Thorne owned that now, a fact that gnawed at Victor like a cancer. Instead, He took a sterile, minimalist apartment in the Seaport district, a glass box overlooking the harbor that had once been the source of his family's fortune. He spent his days in a small, rented office, surrounded by a skeleton crew of young, ambitious analysts who knew him only as a cautionary tale, a fallen prince trying to reclaim a lost kingdom. His obsession, the singular focus that drove him from dawn until the early hours of the morning, was Julian Thorne. Thorne wasn't just the man who had orchestrated his downfall. He was the embodiment of everything Victor had lost. Thorne was celebrated, respected, feared. He moved through the world with an effortless confidence that Victor had once possessed, but now had to feign. Every news article praising Thorne's latest acquisition, every society photo of Thorne at a gala, was a fresh twist of the knife. But it was a deeper, more personal wound that festered in the darkness of his solitude. The memory of Nova. He had tried to bury her, to erase her from his history as thoroughly as he had been erased from Boston's elite. He told himself it was a necessary cruelty, a surgical cut to save his own life. She and the child had been a weight, a vulnerability he couldn't afford during the Thorne onslaught. In his mind, he had constructed a narrative of self-preservation. He had left her at a world-class hospital, the account paid in full. He had done what he had to do, yet her ghost haunted him. He saw her in the faces of strangers on the street, in the brushstrokes of a painting in a gallery window. He remembered the smell of turpentine that always clung to her clothes, the quiet way she would watch him, her eyes full of a sad, knowing intelligence he had chosen to ignore. He remembered the swell of her belly, the fierce, protective way she would hold it, and a flicker of something akin to regret would stir in the cold, empty space where his heart used to be. He never sought to find out what happened to her. To know for sure would be to confront the true monstrosity of his actions. It was easier to leave her as a ghost, a half-remembered dream. He assumed she had lost the baby. How could she not have, in that storm? And had disappeared, probably back to the provincial life he had plucked her from. The thought brought him a twisted sort of comfort. His plan to reclaim his empire was audacious, born of desperation and a burning need for revenge. He was targeting the one part of his father's original company that Thorne hadn't absorbed, a small, struggling subsidiary dealing in advanced marine technology. It was sentimental, undervalued, and, Victor believed, the key to his resurrection. He was calling in old favors, leveraging his family name, what was left of it, and using a network of shadowy foreign investors to mount a proxy battle to regain control. It was a long shot, and he knew it. He was an underdog, a pariah. The old guard of Boston finance wanted nothing to do with him. They remembered his arrogance, his recklessness, and the spectacular way he had self-destructed. He was a bad bet. One rain-swept afternoon, his lead analyst, a sharp young man named Peterson, came into his office, a tablet in his hand. "Sir," Peterson said, his voice hesitant. "There's something you need to see. It's about the charity auction for the Maritime Museum. Thorne is the primary benefactor this year." "I don't care about Thorne's philanthropic posturing," Victor snapped, not looking up from his screen. "It's not that, sir. It's his fiancée." The word snagged Victor's attention. Fiancée. He hadn't heard anything about Thorne being engaged. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What about her?" Peterson slid the tablet across the desk. It was open to a society page, a preview of the upcoming gala. There was a photo of Julian Thorne, smiling, looking infuriatingly dashing. And on his arm, Victor's breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was her. It was Nova. But it was not the Nova he remembered. The soft, timid girl was gone. This woman was a stranger. Her hair was cut in a sharp, elegant style. She wore a dress that was both sophisticated and daring. Her eyes, the same warm brown eyes he remembered, now held a cool, unnerving confidence. There was an iron strength in her posture, a self-possession that was utterly foreign. And on her finger, a diamond that dwarfed any of the trinkets he had ever given her. The caption beneath the photo read, "Julian Thorne and his fiancée, celebrated artist Alara Phoenix, will be hosting this year's Maritime Heritage Gala." Phoenix, the enigmatic artist whose work was the talk of the art world. He'd seen her paintings in magazines, never making the connection. The raw, emotional power of them suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. A wave of nausea washed over him. She was alive. She had not only survived, she had thrived. And she was with him. With Thorne, the architect of his ruin. The two central figures of his personal hell. United. It couldn't be a coincidence. The timing was too perfect. His return to Boston, his play for the company, and now this. She was a weapon, and Thorne was aiming her directly at his heart. A cold, primal rage, deeper and more potent than any he had ever felt, surged through him. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about possession. She was his wife, his creation. The idea that she had not only escaped, but had been remade by his enemy was an unbearable violation. He stared at the photo, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He saw the way Thorne looked at her, a mixture of pride and genuine affection. He saw the way her hand rested on Thorne's arm, a gesture of easy intimacy. And in that moment, Victor Vance knew that his war was no longer just about reclaiming his empire. It was about reclaiming his wife. He would get her back. He would break her alliance with Thorne and expose her for what she was. A treacherous, ungrateful woman who had forgotten her place. He would remind her who she belonged to. He would destroy Julian Thorne and take back everything he had ever lost, starting with the ghost who had just walked back into his life. The Maritime Heritage Gala was the glittering apex of Boston's social season, a place where old money and new power collided in a symphony of clinking champagne glasses and whispered secrets. This year, it was being held in the Grand Hall of the city's Contemporary Art Museum, a cavernous space of white walls and soaring ceilings. And tonight, it was my stage. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, my hand resting lightly on Julian's arm. I wore a gown of emerald green silk that shimmered under the gallery lights, a stark contrast to the drab, muted colors Victor had always insisted I wear. My hair was swept up, showcasing the clean line of my neck and a pair of diamond earrings that were a gift from Julian. Battle armor, he had called them, with a wry smile. From this vantage point I could see the entire room, a swirling sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. And I could see him. Victor stood alone near the bar, a stark, solitary figure in the glittering crowd. He was watching me. There was no pretense, no attempt to hide it. His gaze was a physical thing, a raw, burning intensity that cut through the noise and the chatter of the room. He looked different, thinner, harder, the easy arrogance replaced by something more desperate, more dangerous. But the eyes were the same. The cold, possessive eyes that had haunted my nightmares for 5 years. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of silk and bone. For a single, terrifying moment, I was that girl again, the helpless, pregnant woman on the cold marble floor. I could feel the phantom pains of labor, the icy chill of the rain. Julian must have sensed it because his hand gently squeezed mine. "You ready?" he murmured, his voice a low anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. I took a deep breath, drawing on the years of carefully constructed armor I had built around my heart. I was not that girl anymore. I was the phoenix. I had risen from the ashes of the life he had tried to destroy. I met Victor's stare across the crowded room, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I gave him a slow, deliberate smile, a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "Ready," I said, my voice clear and steady. Our descent down the staircase was a performance. Every eye in the room was on us. Julian, the undisputed king of Boston finance, and his mysterious, beautiful fiancée. We were the ultimate power couple, and we played the part to perfection. Julian was charming and relaxed, greeting acquaintances with a warm handshake and a disarming smile. I was serene, poised, the enigmatic artist at his side. We moved through the room in a slow, calculated circle, making our way inevitably toward the bar, toward him. With every step I could feel his gaze on me, a tangible weight. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The crowd seemed to melt away, the noise fading to a dull hum, until it was just the three of us in our own private universe of pain and betrayal. We stopped a few feet from him. Julian turned to me, his back partially to Victor, a deliberate act of dismissal. "Darling," he said, his voice loud enough to be overheard. "Would you like some champagne?" "I'd love some," I replied, my voice smooth as glass. Julian turned to the bartender, leaving me face to face with my past. "Nova," Victor said. His voice was a low, gravelly sound, a pale imitation of the smooth baritone I remembered. "It's Phoenix now," I corrected him coolly, taking a deliberate sip of the champagne Julian handed me. I didn't offer him the courtesy of using his name. His eyes narrowed. "That's quite a reinvention. The abandoned wife, reborn as an art world darling on the arm of the man who ruined me. It's a compelling story. Did you and Thorne cook it up together?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "My life, my success, that's all mine. Some of us are capable of building things, others are only good at destroying them." The barb hit its mark. A flicker of rage crossed his face. "You were nothing when I found you," he hissed, his voice dropping so only I could hear. "A paint-stained girl in a rundown gallery. I gave you everything. I made you who you are." "You gave me a cage," I retorted, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to control it. "A beautiful, gilded cage. And then, you left me to die in it." For the first time, a flicker of something other than anger appeared in his eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe even a sliver of guilt. "I left you at the best hospital in the city," he said, the words sounding rehearsed, hollow. "I made sure you were taken care of." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that turned heads nearby. "Taken care of? You left me on the floor, in labor, during a hurricane, Victor. You turned off your phone and left me to crawl through a flooded alley. If it wasn't for Julian, your son would be dead. I would be dead." The mention of a son hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, his composure cracking for the first time. "My son?" he stammered. "Yes," I said, twisting the knife. "Leo. He's 5 years old. He's bright, and funny, and kind. He's everything you're not. And he thinks Julian is the greatest man in the world. He calls him Uncle Jules." The look on his face was a grotesque mixture of shock, pain, and pure, unadulterated fury. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would finally see a crack in his monstrous facade. But I had underestimated the depth of his narcissism. His pain quickly morphed back into rage. "You kept him from me," he seethed. "My son, my heir. You hid him away with him. You have no right to him," I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. "You lost that right the moment you walked out that door." Julian chose that moment to turn back to us, his expression one of polite curiosity, as if he hadn't been listening to every word. "Is everything all right, my love?" he asked, placing a possessive hand on the small of my back. Victor's eyes darted to Julian's hand, and a fresh wave of hatred washed over his face. He looked like a cornered animal, wounded and unpredictable. "Vance was just congratulating us on our engagement," I said, my voice sweet as poison. Julian smiled, a cold, predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. "How kind of you, Vance. I'm a lucky man. Nova is truly one of a kind. Resilient, brilliant, and fiercely loyal. Qualities I'm sure you can appreciate. The veiled insult hung in the air between them. The two rivals, the two most powerful men in the room, locked in a silent battle over the woman who stood between them. But I was no longer a prize to be won. I was a player in the game, and I had just made my opening move. "If you'll excuse us," Julian said, his tone final. "My fiancé and I have guests to attend to." He guided me away, his hand firm on my back, leaving Victor standing alone at the bar, his face a mask of thunderous rage. As we walked away, I allowed myself a small, triumphant glance over my shoulder. He was still watching me, the ghost of his past, now the architect of his future ruin. The masquerade was over. The war had just begun. The gala was the first shot fired in a war fought not in boardrooms, but in the gilded cages of Boston's high society. Our engagement was the talk of the city, a scandalous, delicious piece of gossip that had everyone watching. Every move we made was calculated, every public appearance a carefully orchestrated play designed to unravel Victor Vance. Julian was a master strategist. He understood that Victor's greatest weakness was not his finances, but his ego. He needed to be seen as a king, powerful and in control. So we set about systematically dismantling that image, piece by piece. We would appear at restaurants moments after he'd been seated, our presence sucking the air out of the room, turning him into a sideshow. We bought a table next to his at a charity auction, outbidding him on a yacht he desperately wanted, the crowd's applause, a symphony of his humiliation. My role was more subtle, more psychological. I was the ghost at his feast, a constant living reminder of his greatest failure and cruelty. I knew his weaknesses, his vanities, the secret fears he hid behind his arrogant facade, and I used that knowledge with surgical precision. I started by re-engaging with the art world he had forced me to abandon. The museum that hosted the gala offered me a solo exhibition, an offer I accepted with feigned reluctance. The show, titled The Phoenix, was a retrospective of my work over the past 5 years. It was a visual diary of my survival, my rage, and my rebirth. The centerpiece was a massive, chaotic canvas I had painted in the days after Leo's birth. It depicted a woman, faceless and screaming, in the heart of a violent storm. It was raw, brutal, and deeply personal. I called it Figure It Out. The exhibition was a critical and commercial triumph. On opening night, the gallery was packed. Julian stood by my side, a proud and supportive partner. And across the room I saw Victor, staring at the painting, his face ashen. He was the only person in that room who understood its true meaning. He was forced to stand there, smiling and making small talk, while the evidence of his monstrousness was celebrated as a masterpiece. My next move was to target his business. He was desperately trying to secure funding for his bid to reclaim the marine tech company. He was courting a group of conservative old money investors, men who valued family and stability above all else. Men who would be horrified by the story of what he had done to his pregnant wife. I began to have quiet lunches with the wives of these men, women I had known from my previous life. I didn't have to say a word about Victor. I simply told my story. I spoke of being a single mother, of the challenges of raising a child alone, of the importance of my art in my healing process. I talked about Leo, about his love for his Uncle Jules, about the stable, loving home Julian had provided for us. I was the picture of grace and resilience, a woman who had overcome unimaginable hardship. The story of the heroic Julian Thorne saving a mother and child from a storm became a legend in the drawing rooms of Beacon Hill. The whispers started, as I knew they would. Rumors of Victor's instability, his cruelty, his shocking abandonment of his family. His potential investors grew cold. Meetings were canceled. Calls went unreturned. He was being slowly, methodically ostracized, frozen out by the very people he needed to succeed. Victor grew more and more desperate. He started to make mistakes. He became volatile in meetings, his temper flaring. He was drinking too much, showing up to events looking haggard and unkempt. The illusion of control he had worked so hard to project was shattering. He tried to fight back. He started planting stories in the tabloids, hinting at a torrid affair between me and Julian that had predated my separation from him. He painted himself as the victim, the cuckolded husband whose wife had conspired with his enemy to destroy him. But it was too late. I had already defined the narrative. I was the survivor, the phoenix. He was the monster. The psychological toll on him was immense. He started trying to contact me, leaving rambling, incoherent voicemails in the middle of the night. They were a pathetic cocktail of threats, pleas, and drunken self-pity. "You think you can erase me, Nova?" he slurred in one message. "I am in your blood. I am in that boy's blood. You will never be free of me." In another, he was practically weeping. "I made a mistake. I know that. But I was under so much pressure. Thorn was destroying me. I can make it up to you. To our son. Just let me see him. Please." I never responded. I played the messages for Julian, and we would listen to them together, a grim ritual in our war. His unraveling was a testament to the success of our strategy. But I felt no joy, only a cold, hollow sense of purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about ensuring he could never hurt anyone again. The final act of his corporate demise came during a shareholder meeting for the marine tech company. Victor had managed, against all odds, to secure enough proxy votes to challenge the current board. He stood at the podium, looking gaunt but defiant, and made an impassioned speech about legacy, about family, about his vision for the future. It was a masterful performance. He was charming, convincing. For a moment it looked like he might actually win. And then Julian, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, stood up to speak. "Mr. Vance speaks eloquently about the importance of family and legacy," Julian began, his voice calm and reasonable. "And I agree. A company's leadership should reflect those values. Which is why I believe the shareholders have a right to know about the character of the man asking for their trust." A low murmur went through the room. "I'm sure many of you have heard rumors about Mr. Vance's personal life," Julian continued. "I'm not here to traffic in gossip. I'm here to present facts." On the large screen behind the podium, a document appeared. It was a copy of a restraining order, filed 5 years ago. My name was listed as the petitioner, Victor's as the respondent. It detailed his emotional abuse, his controlling behavior, and the events of the night he left me. It was a document I had filed from my hospital bed and then forgotten about, a legal footnote to my pain. Julian's investigators had unearthed it. "This document," Julian said, his voice ringing with cold fury, "details how Victor Vance abandoned his wife while she was in labor, during a Category 3 hurricane, in order to close a business deal. He left her, and his unborn son, for dead." A collective gasp went through the room. Victor stood at the podium, frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. "The woman he abandoned is my fiancée," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The son he abandoned is a boy I have been proud to help raise. This is not a man who understands family. This is not a man who understands loyalty. This is not a man who deserves your trust." He sat down. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening. Victor stood at the podium, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked around the room, at the faces of the shareholders staring at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. He was no longer a king. He was a fraud, a monster laid bare for all the world to see. He turned and stumbled away from the podium, pushing his way through the stunned crowd and out the door. The vote was a formality. His bid was crushed. His comeback was over. He was, once again, ruined. But this time it was not just his fortune he had lost. It was his name, his reputation, his very identity. He was nothing. The king had been unraveled. After the shareholder meeting, Victor disappeared. His apartment was empty, his office cleared out. He had vanished as completely as he had 5 years ago, but this time he left behind the smoking ruins of his reputation. The city buzzed with the scandal for weeks. Then, as scandals do, it faded, replaced by new headlines. For the first time in a long time, there was peace. Julian and I began to plan a life that wasn't centered around a war. We talked about moving back to California, about giving Leo a life away from the ghosts of Boston. Our relationship, forged in the crucible of revenge, was slowly, tentatively, beginning to transform into something real, something tender. The marriage that had been a strategic alliance was starting to feel like a genuine partnership, built on a foundation of trust and shared history. But I knew it wasn't over. Victor was a wounded animal, and a wounded animal is at its most dangerous. I felt his absence not as a relief, but as a silence before a storm. The storm came a month later, on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a gray, dreary day, the sky the color of slate. Rain lashed against the windows of the Beacon Hill brownstone, the same house I had once shared with Victor. I was in my studio, the one Julian had built for me, a beautiful, light-filled space that had replaced Victor's sterile home gym. Leo was at a friend's house for a play date. Julian was at his office downtown. I was alone. I was working on a new painting, a landscape of the California hills, all soft greens and golds, a picture of peace. But I couldn't concentrate. A strange, unsettling feeling had been prickling at the back of my neck all day. Then I heard it. A sound from downstairs. A floorboard creaking in the foyer. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a thick glass paperweight, and crept to the studio door, my heart pounding in my ears. I peered down the long hallway, and I saw him. Victor stood in the foyer, dripping water onto the polished hardwood floors. He looked like a wraith. His suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He had lost even more weight, and his eyes were wild, unhinged, burning with a feverish intensity. "Nova," he breathed, his voice a raw, broken whisper. He took a staggering step toward the staircase. "Stay where you are," I commanded, my voice shaking but loud. He stopped, a strange, twisted smile playing on his lips. "This house, it still feels like mine. Our home." "It was never a home," I said, my grip tightening on the paperweight. "It was a prison, and it's not yours anymore. Nothing here is yours. He is mine," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, clear. "The boy, Leo, my son. He is a Vance. He belongs with me." "He is my son," I snarled, a feral, protective rage surging through me. "And he is nothing like you. You've poisoned him against me," he accused, taking another step. "You and Thorne, you've filled his head with lies. But he has my blood. He'll understand. A father's right." "You have no rights!" I screamed, the sound echoing in the cavernous house. "You gave them up. You threw them away in a flooded alley." The memory of that night, the raw, primal terror of it, flooded back. The pain, the cold, the absolute certainty that I was going to die. It all came rushing back. And with it, a blinding, white-hot fury. "Do you have any idea what you did?" I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I was in labor for 36 hours. The doctor said we were lucky to be alive. Leo's heart stopped twice. Twice, Victor. And where were you? You were in a hotel room with your mistress, carving up your empire, an empire you lost anyway. You weren't just careless. You weren't just selfish. You tried to murder us." The truth, spoken aloud for the first time, hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. He flinched as if I had struck him. For the first time, the full weight of his actions seemed to land on him. The carefully constructed lies he had told himself for 5 years crumbled to dust, leaving him exposed, raw. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, I didn't. I wouldn't." "But you did," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You did. And now you want to waltz back in here and claim him? My son? The son I almost died to bring into this world? The son Julian saved?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic self-pity. "He has everything," he choked out. "Thorn. He took my company, my money, my house. And he took you. He took my son. I have nothing left." "You have exactly what you deserve," I said, my voice like ice. That was when his despair curdled into something else, something ugly and violent. His eyes hardened, the last vestiges of humanity draining away, replaced by the cold, possessive rage I knew so well. "If I can't have him," he said, his voice a low growl, "then no one can." He lunged for the stairs. I didn't think. I acted. All the fear, all the pain, all the rage of the last 5 years coalesced into a single, explosive moment. As he reached the 3rd step, I ran down the hallway and threw myself at him with all my strength. We tumbled down the stairs together, a tangle of limbs and fury. We landed in a heap on the marble floor of the foyer, the same spot where he had left me 5 years ago. The paperweight flew from my grasp, skittering across the floor. He was stronger than me, his hands like iron vices as he grabbed my arms. He was shouting, spitting, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. I fought back, kicking, scratching, biting, a wild animal fighting for her child's life. His hand closed around my throat. My vision started to swim, black spots dancing in front of my eyes. This is it, I thought, a strange, horrifying sense of déjà vu washing over me. He's finally going to finish what he started. And then the front door burst open. Julian stood there, framed in the doorway, the gray, rainy light behind him. He took in the scene in an instant. Me on the floor, Victor's hands around my throat. The look on Julian's face was something I had never seen before. A terrifying, glacial fury. He moved faster than I would have thought possible. He tore Victor off me, throwing him against the wall with a sickening crunch. Victor crumpled to the floor, dazed. Julian stood over him, his chest heaving, his fists clenched, every inch of him radiating controlled, lethal violence. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Julian must have called them. Victor looked up from the floor, not at Julian, but at me. His eyes were no longer filled with rage, but with a hollow, empty despair. He had lost. He knew it. He had lost everything, forever. He was just a man. A broken, pathetic man who had destroyed everything he had ever touched, including himself. As the police swarmed in, handcuffing him, reading him his rights, I stood up on shaky legs. Julian wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight. I buried my face in his chest, and finally, after 5 long years, the tears came. Not tears of fear or anger, but tears of release. It was over. The storm had finally passed. The story of Nova's rise from the ashes is a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit. Her journey from a betrayed wife to a formidable queen in a world that tried to break her is a battle cry for anyone who has ever been left in the dark. Victor's downfall wasn't just about losing an empire, it was about facing the ghost he created. A woman who returned not for revenge, but for reclamation. Of her life, her power, and her son. She didn't just survive the storm, she became one. What did you think of Nova's incredible transformation? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of betrayal and redemption, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more emotional stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to life.